Call this meeting to order officially at 4 minutes past 7 on Monday, April 7th, 2025. I will do a roll call. Bob Carroll, Victoria Duckworth,
Here.
Lindsay Fox, as Fiona said, Lindsay is not able to make it. Anne Marie Foley,
Here.
Deborah George, Brian Houle,
Here.
Chantel Kimball,
Here.
Essex Petrie,
Here.
David Robbins is here, Sue Robbins,
Here.
Colleen Roy, and Roshana Tangi. Okay. And with us, we have, of course, Town Planner Fiona Coughlin and Sarah O'Brien from our CMRPC team. So we will proceed. We have one action item on the agenda, and that is to approve the minutes of the March 3rd meeting. Any additions or corrections to be noted? Any motion to be made?
I move we approve the meeting minutes for March 3rd as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion of the motion?
I never received any copy of the minutes, so I can't vote on that.
Okay. So. Oh. Yeah, so with no discussion, we'll call for a vote. Victoria Duckworth,
Aye.
Anne Marie Foley,
I'm gonna abstain. I don't think I've seen them either. Sorry.
okay, Brian Houle,
I abstain.
Chantel Kimball,
Aye.
Essex Petrie,
Aye.
David Robbins votes aye, Sue Robbins,
Aye.
and declare the motion carried by a vote of 5 in favor, none against, and 2 abstentions. All right, so moving on to the main items on our agenda, we have the formatted draft plan and implementation matrix review. How do we want to go through this? I know I have a number of comments and some questions I want the group to answer regarding the draft plan, but any suggestions for how we want to go through this as a group here tonight?
So, Sarah, I don't know if you want to chime in, but I was thinking that we could just have CMRPC give a summary of the comments. I mean, we did circulate them for review. I'm sure not everybody got to see them because there was quite a good amount. But I think that it may be most efficient for CMRPC to kind of give a summary of the comments that were received and what were implemented and what can require further discussion from the working group, so that we can spend most of the time focusing on the ones that are that garner a bit more discussion. Sarah, if you disagree with that, you let me know.
If I can preface the discussion with a little bit of technical notes too, because at this point we have a lot of different documents flying around, and if it'd be helpful to the committee, I'd love to just go over, what we have for distribution too.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
That'd be great.
So, in your folder, we moved all the previous drafts to kind of like an archive folder, so you do still have them if you want to go back and forth or review, what has changed. We followed the formatting that we went over with way back when with Elena and the non-chapter elements. So that same kind of formatting. There's 2 versions of the full draft plan. One says compressed, one does not. The compressed one is because it is long. If you have trouble with your internet or your computer, it's the easier one to open and reference. But you will notice some of the pictures are blurry and little design things like that. If there's a picture that's blurry in the other version, then that's a note we would love to love. but the compressed version will look a little funky design-wise, and that will not be the version that will be dispersed to the public. That's just for your ease in opening it and scanning through it. The design for those files is not as complete as it will be because the language isn't 100% set, and we will go over some changes tonight that will be happening in the next round. So little things like spacing and alignment, and you'll see sometimes the action item headers on one page and the text is under another page. That's because we don't have the language locked in yet, so we can't do those little nitpicky design things that will come at the end. So I'll give that little disclaimer. If you don't like pictures or colors or bigger things like that, for sure you can let us know, but you won't find perfect alignment on the text at this point. But we wanted to get that out to you to see what the final plan will look like. I know you've been very patient with the ugly Word documents, so thank you for that. And then we have the same comment matrix we've been using for the draft chapters. I archived all the other tabs in red, so those are no longer active. Those are all comments that we've addressed in previous rounds. And then there's a green tab now for these next round of comments. In the notes column, I kind of used tense a little to tell you if it's been implemented in the draft that you have currently. And then there are other comments that didn't make it into the current draft, so those will be in the next one. So this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing, but I hope that's helpful to see. I used implemented to say it's been already done, and then will change, will fix, will be in the next draft that you'll be seeing. And we wanted to hold off on sending you that just so we could go over this as a committee and make sure all these changes are okay before we implement them. So I think that's all yeah. Oh, and then we have the implementation matrix, which is not in Word version or InDesign version, which is the software we're using. That will remain in Excel, unless you'd like it to look better. We find towns usually like Excel because you can edit it as you go and check things off and use it to track progress. We've also talked about, I think in the last meeting, converting it into something like Airtable, which would let you integrate it into a website if you wanted to, or have multiple people changing it, kind of similar to SharePoint. So at this point, it is in Excel. We can still have comments on that in the same comment matrix as the one we're using for the draft plan. What would be super helpful for this committee especially, we have the lead and partner columns. If you are on a board or committee that you think should be the lead for a specific action item or would be a good partner, there were those little local tidbits that we should know. Specifically looking for comments on that would be very helpful. Or if there are other smaller plans that certain boards, departments, committees have that we want to align with for the priority column and the time frame column, that could be a great opportunity to do that too. But yeah, if we could spend a little bit of time going over some content changes we've been recommended since the last time we spoke. There are a few bigger ticket items, we would say. And then I see some of you are in this sheet. That's great. If there's other things you want to talk about or discuss tonight, I'd be happy to do so. And I think there's a discussion to be had about the timeline moving forward. We could do that now or later, Fiona and Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think I know I'm sure we're all kind of anxious to get this done. I'm also pretty sure that we would like to make sure that it as complete as we can reasonably make it. And I suspect that with the body of the draft plan, I think there are a few comments that are items that we're going to want to discuss this evening, kind of try to get something nailed down, and probably by the time we're done with the discussion this evening, we'll have a pretty good sense of how much work is left to do in the draft plan. The implementation matrix, that's sort of there's more on that I think probably more work that still needs to be done. So I don't want to rush things through. I know we've got we've got a desire to, offer this up at the May town meeting for a town meeting vote of approval. My sense is that time is a little tight for that, but I'm sort of open to suggestions for how we want to proceed with that. We could also make the mistake of really, just working on it, and, refining it to the point where we're never really quite done. And I don't think we don't want to do that either. So I'd be looking for everybody's sense of, how much more work, and maybe after we're done with the discussion of the draft plan and whatever we discussed tonight with the implementation matrix, maybe by the time we're done, then we'll have a better sense of how much more time we think we're going to need as a committee to get this ready, and what the next steps are going to be. Is sort of an obvious next step is, it has to be, presenting it to the planning board for the planning board's review and approval. That's probably that sort of has to, that's one of the first things that once we think we're done with it, that's the first place it has to go. But, and then beyond that, what else do we want to do? And without trying to get into too much of a detailed discussion right now on the implementation matrix and the implementation plan, there's probably quite a bit more that we can do to refine that and expand it. But at some point, we could say, as far as the master plan is concerned, we've got an implementation matrix, and then we hand that off to an implementation team to drill down into more detail. Just as one example of something that's going to have to be done is there are several action items which are really the same thing showing up in different chapters. So we want to be able to connect all the related action items together so that we end up with, although it appears as multiple action items in the implementation matrix, it's really one task that some board or committee or group will end up doing. So I've identified some of those, but it's going to take some more work to sort of review the 167 action items, which is more than I was hoping we'd end up with. But I think it condenses down into a somewhat smaller number when it's translated into the actual work that's going to be done. But some of that, scheduling, assigning to responsible parties, and correlating related action items and dependencies. This action has to be done before that has to be done. That is something we could at least contemplate having the implementation team do. So we don't necessarily have to get that all nailed down in the published plan with an implementation matrix. So I think we may, and we can talk about this more after we've gone through what we mainly want to go through this evening. Fiona, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to give just a little bit of additional background. So obviously, we're here tonight to review the kind of final version of the draft plan and the implementation matrix as covered by Sarah and Mr. Chair. But these comments, so I did a kind of internal email to boards and committee members and staff and department heads in the town of Grafton to kind of glean their initial feedback. That matrix that Sarah has, that people are in and see, and that was in my email, that's the comments that we're looking at. So to Dave's point, tonight we're going to go through those, and depending on the discussion, this could take a little bit longer because we still do need to have additional public comment period as well. So it's really up to the working group to decide their comfort level with moving forward, and taking the time and waiting until, fall. The planning board approval can come at, there's really no kind of scheduled time. Obviously, we're at the mercy of town meeting twice a year. So you're kind of running the risk of, having it not on people's radar for about 4 months between the town meetings or trying to see what we can do and get, all final approvals and comfort and a good comfort level from the group by ideally by the 5th. But it really is up to the working group what they would like to do. I just kind of wanted to make it known that there's going to be another public comment period for a couple of weeks. And then those comments need to be incorporated as well. So it's feasible, but might be, might be a little challenging to get it all. So just something to consider.
Anne Marie.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was going to just say something similar, if we're looking at 5 weeks and having to have it go before planning, in addition to, I don't know if it comes through select board and obviously a public comment period, I would hate to, at this point, I appreciate, pushing it off another 4 or 5 months. Doesn't sound appealing either, but it would be a shame to try to push this process, especially like the public comment period, through in such a short time. But again, my first go around with something like this.
So why don't we proceed through the comments that we want to talk about this evening on the draft plan, and and I think I think I have a few things that I want to that I had not previously written down as a comment, but I'd like the group's opinion on. So we'll start with what Sarah's prepared to go through.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you are in the chapter comments document, the ones that I highlighted in yellow, thank you, are ones that I think are bigger changes. If there are ones highlighted that are not highlighted in yellow that we want to discuss, I'm totally open to that. Most of those changes are in the narrative rather than the action item, objective, or goal text, or they're just smaller problems that are in a 300-page document that needed to be fixed. So the first one is getting to what Dave was talking about, some of these action items that I think the goal is to have every chapter stand on its own in a way, but when you put it all together, some of it is redundant, and those separate lenses of chapters aren't as helpful for an implementation committee. So the first action item that was suggested to go was action item 3.1.5 in housing. So that was the first action item was about mixed use development by transit centers, and the second one was about mixed use development. So those were combined. The second change was under economic development. Under action item 1.1.2, it was very close to action item 2.5.1 in the land use chapter. Let me rack my brain about which one this was. I think it was about priority development parcels. So a plan to go through the town and look at priority parcels for the town to develop or incentivize development. So we deleted the one under economic development and left it under land use just because it was bigger than just businesses. It was also some housing and preservation as well. I think if we scroll down a bit to the next yellow, row 37. Oh, this one I would love to crowdsource a little bit. In the food map under quality of life, we have a few spots that this commenter was not sure which places they were. It might be places that are now closed that we should erase off the map. But if you want, Fiona, I can share my screen with this map instead if we want to go through it now, or the committee can come back to this comment and provide some guidance if there's one on Snow Road and one on Upton Street. This was
Yeah,
that
I've
map
got
of quality of life that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do want to come back to this map. Partly to ask whether we want the map in the document. And the reason for raising that question is that the text of the document never makes reference to the map. So the map is there, but it's not necessarily clear to the reader what the point of including the map is. So it's and you know there end up, in addition to the one that I put in the comment here that's highlighted in yellow, there are two other locations shown on that map that no, I guess I mentioned two in the comment. That is my comment, by the way. And there's one other that I have questions about. So, but the point of the map is to illustrate walking distances to various food retailers. And like I said, that I did not see a reference in the text to this map. So my question is, do we think this map is useful in the context of the document? And if so, maybe at least a mention in the text as to, look at this map and here's what that map tells you.
Yeah, that reference is action item 3.1.3. We look at it through like a zoning lens. So it's not as much about walking versus car as the map suggests, but it's still looking at that buffer of which neighborhoods do have the food retailer and which ones do not.
Yeah, so my notes when I was reviewing this the other day, I said it looks like it's related to action item 3.1.3, but 3.1.3, I did not see that 3.1.3 doesn't reference that map in any way.
Sarah, if I may, I think it might be helpful to, I think, do you have it up?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe I'll stop sharing for a second.
And I can make this bigger too.
Yeah, just kind of generally speaking, if there's a map or a picture in the document should point the reader to the map and explain why the map is there. So Brian, your hand up was earlier. Did you have a comment on this?
The only comment I had was, I know we were talking about deserts, food deserts, and you know, I guess that the only thing that I could see would be relative to a map like this, but I think comments in the past, we don't have food deserts in Grafton. So I can't think of any other reason it would be there.
So we're focusing on the markers that look, the symbology looks like a little home, more or less. Yeah, Snow Road, I don't know what that is. It's marked as convenience stores, pharmacies, and drugstores.
Yeah.
I don't know what that one would be.
There's literally nothing at that location except a house.
Okay. So Sarah, maybe we can just make a note that one. And then
I'd also note that it looks like Village Dairy down on on Main Street is called that as a meat market, fish and seafood market. It's a convenience store.
Okay, thank you. That yellow down there.
Yeah, the bottom left.
And in the center of the map, right off to the left of the common, there's a purple convenience store marker there. That is at the location of Wong's Restaurant, which is not in the category of food retailers we wanted to show on the map. But there's also a purple one right on the common or just off the common. And I don't know, one of those two maybe is meant to mark the location of the Cumberland Farms, although neither one of those markers sits on it, is quite at the location of Cumberland Farms. And other than Cumberland Farms, right around the common, the only other establishment that might be considered a food retailer would be Bushel and Peck, which is
Yeah, sure.
just a little north of the common. And Bushel and Peck is sort of a restaurant, but they also sell just food for takeout. And so they're, yeah,
Similarly, Uncommon Cow has some prepared foods and whatnot as well.
yeah. So it's kind of a question of what are these food retailers intended to represent? Are they something that is, if something is primarily a restaurant, but they do sell some takeout for food, do they qualify to be on this map? Maybe yes, maybe no, because I do not know where the data for this map originated. I've never seen the source data for this. So I've seen various versions of this map going all the way back to when we first began thinking about what should be in the master plan. But yeah, without knowing the data source for this and what is represented by that data, it's hard to be sure how to interpret this. Anne Marie and then Colleen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just sounds like we need to look at this a little bit more closely with some input from the folks who live here in the committee. And like, for example, the common, you might just be changing 2 of those markers to the orange and then just move over the other pink one on Old Upton to reflect a convenience store that's just closer to the common. But, maybe just, I don't think it's not valuable information. I think we just need to clean it up a bit.
Colleen.
So my question would be, the map kind of bleeds out into other communities and marks other parts in Shrewsbury, Worcester, all the way down, below that 122A marker. And I wouldn't be able to verify and know what those signify either. Is there a reason it's bleeding outside of Grafton like that?
Yeah, I think that was a change we talked about last time we looked at the quality of life chapter to more accurately represent those neighborhoods that do go into Worcester for food. But to answer the question about the source, it's a data layer from MAPC. And you'll see in the legend, it is from 2021. So it's going to be a little bit outdated, but they have a full state map of food retailers that we started with and then tweaked it a little bit on what we knew, but is definitely helpful to get some local knowledge on that too.
Okay, so do I get the sense that the group thinks that this map is worth including in the plan? Any objection to that? Let me put it that way. And I think some added text in action item 3.1.3 to refer to them as say something along the lines of consult with figure 2 to I don't know, I'm not going to try to come up with the words off the top of my head, but action item 3.1.3 does seem to draw something from the map. And so if we can if that could be explained in the text to help the reader sort of see what they're supposed to get out of reading the map and why it's interesting. Any further thoughts on that?
Great. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. We can do that.
So back to the comment list.
So the next 2 big ones were also about a discussion we've had in the past with the town services and facilities chapter. So this was specifically on the education action items. Sorry, I'm pulling it up in the draft too. So the first one, 1.1.1, was to construct a new pre-K to first grade facility to replace the 2 older buildings. So this action item came out of stakeholder interviews with the superintendent. The recommendation on the comment is to not specifically say construct, but to suggest that some sort of new facility should be for this specific purpose, it might be a renovation or a restoration of North Grafton Elementary.
So what does everybody think about this one? Victoria?
Yeah, I really like your comment here, Dave. I think that we've kind of gone back and forth a few times throughout this process about being uber prescriptive versus being a little bit more open for what future needs might be met, as long as sort of the feel of the law is kind of what we're going for, which is that the town understands that there is capacity for it to grow, and that we should be very um we should indicate that these two elementary schools are some of the oldest buildings, municipal buildings, and that they may need to be replaced, or may not, whatever that may be. Long-winded way to say that I agree with you that we should kind of maybe go back on the prescriptive language a little bit.
Chantal?
Yeah, I know I had some big concerns about this, especially just because it also feels a little out of step with our current financial situation. But I really like the idea of shifting to that like evaluation of the need language, and then potentially plan renovation or construction accordingly, as opposed to just jumping right to building a new school for, pre-K through first grade.
Any other thoughts one way or the other on this? Okay, do you have what you need out of this, Sarah?
What's that?
Do you have what you need for this? from
Yes,
us?
so I will go with I think you were very helpful in new language. Evaluating the need for and planning for future expansion, renovation, or replacement of North Grafton Elementary School.
Okay,
Cool. So the next one was similar. This was
Super
about,
quick, sorry, I didn't unmute fast enough. It's both schools as I understood it, right? Not just North Grafton, but also South Grafton?
right, yeah,
Uh,
I think we were looking at this item as recognizing the age of the two elementaries, the two oldest elementary schools, and the likely need that something is going to have to be done, and that might, combine with the potential need for additional space. Just as a side comment related to this, I'm going back 20 years on this, but when we looked at school space, we were looking at school space needs about 20 years ago, and the result of that effort was the plan to build a new high school. But part of that was, at the time, 20 years ago, growth was such that they were predicting we would have 4,000 students in the system by the year 2020. So along with the new high school, the suggestion was made at the time that we look at expanding North Grafton and South Grafton Elementary. And we never did that. And in fact, the student population growth turned out not to be what we thought it would be 20 years ago. But even 20 years ago, we looked at those two schools and thought then they would be in need of some work at some time in the future. So here we are. Okay, Anne Marie, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Again, just consistent with how I've been on this committee all along, is I feel like less prescriptive is better. And you just said there's a case in point. So even identifying two schools, I just don't understand the need for that, where it just could be. We're obviously going to, in the future, evaluate what is needed across the board. So I would say to take out individual schools. And again, just keeping it more of a global, potential 10-year plan where others can look to see where the real need is at any given time.
just so I'm clear on rewriting it, are you looking to spread this action item to be more than just the elementary school need?
Yeah,
For me, who knows what we might need in 5 or 10 years. So
yeah, you're suggesting, Henry, something a little bit more generic along the lines of anticipating that we may need to expand or renovate or replace some
Mhm.
existing school buildings.
exactly.
One or more existing school buildings without really speaking to which ones we do, when, or how much, or what.
Yep.
Colleen?
I hear what Anne Marie is saying, and I kind of agree with the vagueness. However, we know these two schools are the oldest and probably in the greatest need. So as a future plan, wouldn't calling out one of our greatest needs make sense? While I agree the idea of being vague is helpful, but we're also creating a plan here where we want people to be looking and making sure that they're evaluating these schools for these potential needs.
Any other thoughts? Sue?
I tend to agree with Colleen. When you look at how old North Grafton Elementary School is, 1955, and then South Grafton 78, I think it's important to leave them in there so they get specifically evaluated as a priority over other schools. So I think it's appropriate to leave it just the way it is.
Okay. Victoria?
Seconded. I agree with Sue and Colleen.
Okay. Sue, your hand is still up. You had another comment? Essek?
Just, are we specifically referring to pre-K to first grade facilities? Aren't those the only two in town? So of course they'll be the oldest. I mean, for instance, isn't the current 7th and 8th grade school was built well before 1978?
Yes, if I remember right, the what is now the middle school was high school when my kids were there.
It was high school when my parents were here, and they graduated in the early 70s. So
I think that dates to around 1970.
it's
Oh,
it's before that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't
So
have
I just for clarification, if we are only referring to pre-K and first grade, those are the only two in town. But I don't know that they're the oldest two overall facilities in the school district buildings.
Yeah, I think North Grafton Elementary at 1955 is the oldest currently operating school building, but it's probably, I think it's been frequently recognized that North and South Elementary are of concern, not just because of their age, but also because of their size. Like I said, when we looked at stuff at the school facilities 20 years ago, we identified those two as being candidates. At the time, we were thinking candidates for expansion, not replacement. But even like just because of the size of those two buildings, in addition to age, that's probably the other reason why those two tend to stick in our minds as buildings that but yeah.
Yep, and that's fair. I don't mean, but I guess I would lean more towards being less prescriptive, as we were talking about earlier, just to give the flexibility, in the future when those needs are specifically identified.
If we wanted to continue identifying those in the action item, it might be along the lines of those being potential candidates for consideration, but not consideration of expansion of school facilities or replacement might not necessarily be limited to those. Although anyway, I don't want to run my mouth off. Chantel.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, the action item really came out of that conversation with Dr. Cummings, where he specifically called out the need at the pre-K through first grade level. So I think sort of honoring the spirit of, his request or his idea without necessarily coming right out and saying we need to, without jumping to the step of assuming we need to build a new school, specifically highlighting the two schools at that grade level where he identified a potential need, feels a little bit better aligned with what the outcome of that meeting was, as opposed to sort of then wholly going like super generic, because obviously at any given time, the school committee and the superintendent are considering the need for expansion, renovation, or new construction. I think that there was a specific need identified at that grade level, not necessarily because of the age of the buildings or what have you. Especially given my understanding is that we've recently invested a lot of resources at the middle school and North Street School, which are the only two schools that are, you know, that could potentially really be um, in that arena, since Millbury Street and the high school are both new construction. So I feel like this sort of balances not being too prescriptive with not being too generic. Kind of seems like it fits in a nice sweet spot for me.
And that's what sounds like it could be fair, Brian.
I don't think this is gonna make or break our presentation here. But we're kind of going back and forth about this. We've got an older junior high school. We've got the two elementary schools that are obviously older. Are we putting ourselves in a place where we're recommending that this is gonna be something that needs to happen? Or are we just making a suggestion that, hey, we've got some older schools, we need to look at them. We need some kind of replacement. We're not sure where that replacement is gonna happen. I think that's more of our role versus, kind of picking and choosing where things might actually go. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind too that the action items we list here are always going to be flexible. That is, we can, as time goes on, we can choose to reinterpret them, to revise them, to abandon them. There were a few action items or recommendations out of the 2001 master plan that we completely abandoned because the things took a different direction and there was no longer a need for them. So, and that's, that kind of flexibility is always going to exist. So this represents sort of, our best guess as to what a future need could be. And I kind of like Chantel's characterization of this, is that it responds to an initial concern that the superintendent raised at a specific set of grade levels, but without being overly prescriptive. So are we kind of content at this point to leave it at that? I don't want to spend the whole evening debating this one item.
I have a proposed new action item in this column E, if you can read it. Added in our favorite word, especially. So plan for future expansion, renovation, or replacement of Grafton Public School facilities, especially, and then listing the elementary schools.
All right. Have we, and as we continue to review this, we can always circle back and revisit this if we need to. But for now, are we okay? Hopefully. If we can move on to the next one.
Yep.
Next one is about the vocational offerings. So we had, the last time we talked about this chapter, changed the action item from specifically mentioning the Grafton High School third floor as the option for vocational offerings. So then now the action item reads, increase vocational offerings within the public school system. This comment notes that the narrative under it does suggest that the high school third floor is a potential for placing those vocational offerings. and would call for it to become more generic in the narrative that we do not know the location of or where those additional classrooms or facilities should be held at this point.
Anybody object to that? Sounds like we're good with that.
Sorry, if I may, I don't know where my raise hand feature is gone. But I'm gonna physically raise my hand. So is this is this something that the group wants to not even go there? Because if it's so up in the air, I might not. You know, I'm reading this and I don't have all of the background knowledge about, you know, the back and forth with the third floor. So if it's you know, sometimes I feel like, you know, if it's just too vague and doesn't seem like total, you know, feasible really at all, if we're planning for, you know, third floor expansion, if that's what the superintendent said, just kind of food for thought of, is it something that's realistic at all?
Yeah, I think my recollection of our last discussion on this, we were all comfortable with the recommendation to increase vocational offerings. What we had an issue with was connecting that future third floor specifically to the vocational offerings. Now, I mean, it potentially means, I mean, you might end up wanting to add that third floor to make room in other parts of the building for the vocational. I guess part of the sense I remember from the discussion was that the future third floor didn't seem like that would be a place where you would hold the classes for the vocational offerings. So indirectly adding the third floor could free up some other space. So that's the connection that the third floor has to this. But I think if well, let me see, I've got two hands raised. Chantel?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that the school was designed in that way to facilitate expansion, I love the idea of that nugget of information being somewhere in the text, but I feel like saying that building a third floor is the way to expand vocational offerings made me very uncomfortable because again, like if you're going to expand the vocational offerings, you're going to go through a lengthier process to determine exactly where those things should happen, exactly how those things should happen. And it's not necessarily going to be building a third floor on the high school. That said, I mean, I think that it's an important fact that we have that expansion capability, and it probably should, it makes sense for that to appear somewhere when we're talking about our school facilities. I'm just not really sure that marrying it to the vocational education is the best idea.
Yeah, so what's on the screen in front of us now, the sentence, the regarding the third floor is one potential option to add space for vocational programs is renovating the high school to add a third floor to the existing two-floor wing. Now, if that was worded slightly differently so that it doesn't sound like that third floor is where the vocational option programs would go, is that sort of, you know, you want to get away from making it look like we're saying that's where the vocational options should go. Do I get that right, Chantel?
Exactly.
Brian?
Yeah, I thought Chantel said that pretty well, so I won't say too much. I'll just say that the vocational was talked about and certainly something we needed to think about going forward. So that's it.
Yeah, so some way of wording this, I'm not going to try to come up with the words, exact words, but we can mention that the high school has space for expansion for that third floor, and that may, I'm not quite sure how to put it, but that could free up space elsewhere in the high school for the vocational offering. So without I think the only thing we want to do here is we don't want to make it look like we're saying that third floor is specifically for the vocational programs. It makes, it adds space to the high school, giving the high school more room to do other programs without saying where those programs go. Sue?
I agree with you, and I think we have to be careful implying that the third floor will be for vocational offerings, because that will also imply if we can't use the third floor, we can't have vocational offerings. If we don't get a third floor, which is not true.
Yeah, we might find that we could introduce some vocational programs within the existing space at the high school, right? Okay, do we have good, we have enough guidance on that? Sarah can go off and work the words.
I feel good about that. Sorry, Fiona, I stole stole your screen share. It gave me the option, do you want to replace screen? I was like, wow. Yeah.
Hold on one sec. Let me get it back. There we
So
are.
the last note for town services and facilities was about sewer. And the chapter as it stands is pretty vague about the sewer system capacity. The numbers that we have are from 2022. I believe we had an update on numbers for 2024, but kept at that 2022 source. If anybody on the committee knows that we can quantify the capacity from the sewer district, we can add more information. And I think it would be strong.
Yeah, I think when I wrote that comment, I was seeing that we have, we say that the sewer system is at 70% capacity, which sort of makes it clear that there's a fair amount of unused capacity. What I was trying to point out here was that we don't have a comparable statement for the water district. We don't, there's nowhere where we say, well, how close are the water districts operating to their capacity? And so if we could get a sense, just, I mean, the only thing we do say in the plan regarding the water district capacity is we're anticipating the water conservation efforts may be needed. But if we can get the water districts to just sort of tell us something like what the sewer department has told us, that sewer is operating right now at 70% of their available capacity. Of the currently available capacity of the water districts, they have a maximum amount they can pump from their wells. How close are they to that maximum today? And of course, if you ask them that question today, you're going to get an answer that's kind of hedging, because some of their wells right now are not actually operating. They've been shut down for excessive PFAS or other reasons. So the way to ask the question is probably, if all of your wells were capable of operating at their maximum capacity, how much of that capacity are you actually pumping these days? And I can't even begin to know the answer, but I think it would give the reader of this plan a better sense of our water district's ability to handle future expansion. And I'm not looking for necessarily precise numbers. I'd just like to be able to say, for the water districts, the same thing we said for sewer. Colleen?
So for water, it's my understanding capacity can change throughout the year, right? Like in the summer months, it's going to be different than say, right now during the wet season. Something I would like to know between the two districts is there any availability for additional wells if needed? It's my understanding South Grafton does not have availability to bring another well online because there's nowhere for one to go. Is that true for the other water district, or and how does that impact growth going forward if one of the wells were to become incapacitated for whatever reason? And I know that that's something that South Grafton thinks about sometimes too, after the big mill fire. So, you know, in South Grafton, there's a bylaw, there's no in-ground irrigation that can go in. That's not necessarily the same for all of Grafton, but in South Grafton, it's because of a water issue. So I think I'd like to know that too.
Yeah, and it may be that concerns like that on the part of the water districts might lead them to be reluctant to make any statement that could be interpreted as some sort of a promise or a commitment to future capacity. Which, you know, I can understand that they might want to hedge on that, but it makes it more difficult for us to think about planning ahead if we just have no idea what their sort of theoretical maximum would be. And that may be something we, you know, without trying to answer those questions tonight, we can pursue that, you know, in between now and the next time, and see if we can see what kind of a sense we can get from the water districts on that. Anne Marie?
Yeah, thank you. I can't find it right now, but the water district, the Grafton Water District did do a study recently, or they outsourced it to a consultant relative to this. So if I can find, and I'm sure it's on their website, there is a document with some of this information just relative to the Grafton Water District.
So Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Colleen, for updating me on South Grafton. I had no idea about the water. But wouldn't that be something that we would mention, that South Grafton is limited in terms of their well capacity at this point? Is that something that should be in this plan?
So I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about their capacity on the current wells, but I'm just talking about their availability to bring new wells online. I don't think that there's any location for a new well to come online.
Okay, that's still a problem, because if something happens to one of the wells, it gets contaminated, where do we go? You know, there should be some kind of plan in place to deal with that. At least we should be thinking about it. If there's only a situation where this is available, but we can't expand beyond that. If something were to happen, what do we do as a town?
So that's my question too, is as far as the water goes, because the water is outside of our purview for both of these water districts. So how much planning can we really do as a town beyond how do we integrate these water districts into the town more in the sense for planning purposes or for communication purposes?
Yeah, that would seem to me to be a good question to put out there, and it's important, I think, when we talk about water, very important.
Any other thoughts on this topic? If not, we can move on to the next highlighted item. Sue?
I just wanted to quick ask Anne Marie if in that study, if she noticed if they asked made any statement as to potential for any new well locations.
Yeah, so I'm just on their website too. I know I have it here. I would have to wait to look through it to be sure.
Okay.
Sorry, but
I just thought maybe you knew offhand.
Yeah, I read through it, I know, and I reached out to them with some questions, but I don't want to quote anything without seeing it. And I don't readily see it on their website, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, again, I don't know where my raise hand feature is. It's not showing up for me, but yeah, I think, you know, just my professional opinion, not speaking, you know, on behalf of the working group at all, but you know, I think it's a good idea to get a snapshot in time of the capacity with the understanding that, you know, it's not static, right? Like the water department and South Grafton Water District and the South Grafton Water District can enhance their infrastructure. I know that there's, you know, we just recently had South Grafton Water District before us, and one of their wells was offline for a number of years, and they're actively trying to bring it back online to enhance their capacity. So, you know, I think it's just, I agree. I think it's a good idea to understand and have maybe similar data point from the water district, so we can, you know, plan intelligently for the future with the understanding that, you know, the system can be enhanced, and just kind of just something to bear in mind, because, you know, I think they're actively trying to do that all the time. So yeah, just as long as, I guess, but, you know, a snapshot, I guess, making it clear that, you know, this is the snapshot as of now. And I guess that kind of just, it's stuck out to me of like, because when you see that, you know, sometimes that data point, that can sound kind of severe. And it doesn't, you know, the data's from 2022, at least for the sewer, and it doesn't incorporate some of the more recent work that's been done. So as long as it's kind of the understanding that the system is continuously being upgraded when there's funds available, when the state makes money available, et cetera.
Okay, if we can move on, it's already 8 o'clock, and I think we've got, you know, some more material to go through here.
Yeah, what would be helpful for sewer is if Anne Marie, you can send me anything you can find in that study. And if another member of the committee can help with South Grafton Water District, then we'd be able to add those points. Some towns do have their districts report in town meeting. I don't know if that's typical for Grafton, but yes, the next one is under land use. So these next few are suggestions on adding new action items. So this first one would be adding something onto the land use chapter on working with developers on entering into conservation restrictions or agricultural restrictions. So I think we had a small discussion on this, on how the town could work with developers on more like informing on certain restrictions that are available to them, since it is something that the town isn't super involved in, but this would be adding another action item here on this. And I might just keep rolling. If there's no discussion, feel free to cut me off. The next one would be also in land use to allocate funding for site and building assessments at town meeting for repurposing properties and land for development. And the one after that was specifically looking at the last goal in land use, which is about implementing this master plan, the most important one. So this would be change from maintain staffing to implement the master plan to increase staffing and resources to implement the master plan.
Any comments?
I think this last one is a great one to end on. It's how will you implement the master plan? So I think I'm trying to remember what we specifically said, but I think we've talked about adding something on creating a specific master plan implementation committee. So that is an option. Oh, what we left it on was pretty vague. It was assess staffing resources for master plan implementation. So the question at hand is, do we want to word it as create a master plan implementation committee, MPIC?
Yeah, I mean, we may want to circle back on that when we talk more specifically about implementation, but I mean, it seems like a master plan implementation committee or some body charged with overseeing the implementation of the master plan is necessary. And not to beat a dead horse, but I created, I asked the select board to create the Open Space and Recreation Committee for the specific purpose of overseeing the implementation of the Open Space and Rec Plan. And so far, I mean, it's, yeah, I'd like to say we can command the implementation of everything and force everybody to do everything we said they should do, but realistically, you know, there's a limit to what you can do. But I have some ideas for what a master plan and implementation committee could do once we've sort of adopted the master plan, but we can, I would defer that discussion for at least a few minutes, if not longer. Brian?
Yeah, just because we're in land use, I would agree with the idea of having a master plan committee, but I did notice something. I don't even know if this is appropriate to bring it up at this point, but there was a description of South Grafton, which I thought we had gone through and said we don't like that kind of description. It starts off on page 57, South Grafton feels overlooked. It has derelict and shabby buildings, facades of restoration and lack of vibrancy. That was just a paragraph on the page, and I thought we had discussed that. I didn't know where to put it. I looked at the I forget what it's called, but the spreadsheet earlier today to try to put something on there, but it didn't appear to me that there was a place where I could put it. So I just wanted to bring it up and mention that, and maybe you could take a look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I will say, I hope this sort of language isn't offensive to anybody. The reason why it's in here is what I'll usually say is for grants. If you would like some evidence for specific grants to help South Grafton, unfortunately, the master plan will always focus on moments of opportunity rather than assets. But if this seems too far in one direction, we can certainly reassess that area. And I think you said page 59, right?
Actually, page 57, but you know what? I'm not familiar with how grants work. I don't want to be the one that says, oh, change it so we can't get a grant. So I'm just bringing it up.
And it might not be that high of stakes.
Okay.
Sometimes grants are just a race to the bottom. And I'm a little nervous because South Grafton lost its environmental justice group, or one of them, right? So I think that's where this is coming from.
Okay.
But if it doesn't fit the tone of the master plan or what this committee would like to do, totally open to changing it.
All right. Thanks.
Right. I do have a few additional comments in various places in the draft plan that I would like to mention this evening and get the committee's reaction on this or thoughts. Starting with economic development. This is actually mentioned in the comment matrix here, but there's that chart or the map which shows assessed value per acre. And I still think that it would be more meaningful for the reader if the chart itself was explicitly property tax revenue per acre. Property tax revenue and assessed value have a straightforward relationship, but I think it's, you know, if people see that map and they see property tax revenue per acre, I think that's more meaningful for most readers than to have to translate assessed value into property tax revenue. Yeah, not mathematically, but just to understand that assessed value is directly proportional to property tax revenue. You know, I think it's slightly easier for people to see what we're getting at if it's the map is expressed directly as property tax revenue per acre. And the map doesn't look any different. You know, everything is the same, you know, same height, the same perspective and everything, but just labeling it as property tax revenue per acre is to me, it seems more meaningful to the reader. Anybody have any thoughts on that one way or the other? I mean, I'll go either way on it, but if, what's our preference? Brian,
I like your presentation there, Dave. I think that'll go very well.
I agree.
okay. Anybody disagree? I mean, just because two people agree with me doesn't mean I'm right. Okay, I don't want to dwell on that. I just wanted to make that point. And this shows up in, the first time it shows up as an economic development, but there are several other places where we have, and I don't remember if I included all that as a comment in the comment matrix there, but I saw it as several other. The names we use for various places in Grafton. In the area around the common, the document sometimes calls it Center Village, sometimes calls it Village Center. And so we should be using the same name for the same areas of Grafton all the time. There's that. I mean, we fairly consistently refer to the three South Grafton mill villages, Saundersville, Fisherville, and Farnhamsville. That's not an issue, but the document has several names for the area around the common. My preference is to call it Grafton Center. Sometimes it's the Grafton Common Historic District, but that's a narrower definition. But the more of the more informal kind of village center type area so I like Grafton Center consistently to refer to the area generally around the common. In North Grafton, we've got the Mill Village in North Grafton, which I understand that as New England Village is its name. And that comes from the New England Manufacturing Company that first created it. But there again, we sometimes call it North Grafton, sometimes. The term North Grafton, to me, it covers a whole lot more territory than the Mill Village. It's kind of centered around Washington Mills. So I would suggest, and I'm open to suggestions, but I think what I'm pretty firm about is I think we should be using the same name for the same area of Grafton throughout the document. And the choice of those names, well, I guess you can look on that on the maps, the maps that show village centers. I've used the names I've chose there. Again, we can change them, but I don't want to dwell on this too much. But I think I'd like to get everybody's people's opinion on what do you think is the best name to use for the North Grafton Mill area? What do you think the best name is to use for the area around the common?
Can we use the common?
Sue?
For as long as I've lived here, which is about 39 years, I guess, I've always known it as Grafton Center. And most people that I've talked to understand it as that. So if someone said to me town center, I'd say, where is that? So I think Grafton Center makes sense to me. North Grafton, it always referred to it as North Grafton. I know it as no other, but I think people who've lived here the longest probably know some of this as New England Village, but for newcomers and everybody else, they certainly aren't going to understand that or know that.
And if we generally like calling it North Grafton, we need to be able to distinguish the Mill Village of North Grafton with the much larger area that's also generally understood to be North Grafton. Anne Marie.
Yeah, I think therein lays the question, are you referring to North Grafton as a zip code? Or are you, again, within the master plan, if they're speaking specifically for that small village area? So I think that perhaps it can be both. To your point, Sue, I typically think of Grafton Center, North Grafton, South Grafton, and broken up by zip codes. But within those, there's a Saundersville, there's different villages, but I guess maybe it depends on exactly where it's referenced in the document. I could see perhaps there's a need for both at times. Oops.
Yep, I saw Anne Marie's hand go up momentarily. The one other terminology issue that I have is sometimes the area around the common is referred to as downtown. And that really just rubs me the wrong way. It's not a downtown. Yeah. The area around the common is perhaps best described as a civic and cultural center of Grafton, with the library, the churches, the common itself. But it's not a downtown. Downtown is where your businesses are. And honestly, there is nowhere in Grafton that, to me, the word downtown applies. So again, I'm looking mostly for a consistent and as unambiguous as we can make it use of terminology for various parts of Grafton. Bob.
Yeah, we had this discussion for the last master plan. Our consultant asked, and there was absolutely no agreement where the boundaries were, even just between north, south, and whatever, Grafton Center. I personally, I object to using the zip code, at least for North Grafton, because it comes all the way down to Lake Ripple, doesn't it?
It
On
does.
at least one side of the road. How many ways do you want to divide it? 3 or have more specificity?
Yeah, we have in various parts of the this new master plan here, we do at times discuss areas that we want to refer to generically as village centers, where it's a cluster of businesses surrounded by or mixed in with residences. So I've provided the map, which shows 8 areas that I'm claiming are village centers, which is sort of the 3 South Grafton Mill villages, Saundersville, Fisherville, and Farnersville, which nobody's arguing about that. It's the area around the common, including but not limited to the historic district, which on my maps I've been labeling Grafton Center. It's there's the Mill Village area, the historic Mill Village area of North Grafton, which I've labeled as New England Village to distinguish it from other parts of North Grafton. There is the the relatively new and not really developed yet transit village up around the MBTA station. I've proposed that we call basically Worcester Street from Carroll Road up to Snow Road as a central business district. That's probably at least when I was trying to think of it, that's probably the best descriptor I could come up with for that area. And then up on Worcester Street over in the Wyman Gordon neighborhood, for lack of a better term, I've labeled that the Northwest Business District. Now, so some of the labels I've chosen for that aren't really well defined or well understood. But ultimately, there are, I think we do need to be consistent in how we refer to these different areas. And then again, I was just talking about the map of village centers generically. Beyond that, there are other ways we refer to parts of town, such as South Grafton, which encompasses the 3 mill villages and more. There's a larger area around the center of town that we sometimes refer to as Grafton Center. There's North Grafton, which of course sort of you know, stretches from Wyman Gordon all the way out to Tufts. You know, we think of all that as North Grafton. So
And
it's
how far
difficult to
south?
come up and like Bob said, you know, we can debate endlessly the names that we want to call these things, but I'm looking for us to be consistent and reasonably well understood in this document. Essek, your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. I don't think that I've seen the map in particular they're talking about, but it sounds like we can get it through this with three kind of larger geographic areas with North Grafton, Grafton Center, and South Grafton, and then each of those have smaller districts within them without necessarily having to draw boundaries. You know, it can be done through text or you know, kind of bold or size of that text. So Grafton Common area within the Grafton Center, Mill Village and Transit Village within North Grafton, and then the three village areas within South Grafton.
Yeah, we cannot draw precise boundaries. There's no basis.
No, nor do I think that we necessarily need
That's
to.
it. And that's your point. I think part of your
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
And we're not, you know, I'm not looking for us to draw precise boundaries, but when we're talking about a particular area of town, I want to make sure we're using the same name for it every time.
And I absolutely agree with that 100%.
Dave, you know that they used to call where we are, this whole part of the town as the farm district.
Yep, back in the day, it was a farm district.
Right, and it also matches up with where there's no sewer or water in the
Indeed.
larger section of the town.
Yeah, in this draft master plan, we've kind of vaguely referred to that as the eastern part of Grafton.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Again,
Except for
you
South.
can't draw precise boundaries around it, but yeah. Colleen, your hand is up.
Quick question. So most people, when they hear Mill Village, they think North Grafton, because I have always thought South Grafton when I heard that, and I think it's because of Mill Village Park.
Yeah, Mill Village is it probably, at least in my mind, from everything I've heard over the years, Mill Village, you know, we have four mill villages in town, the three in South Grafton and the one in North Grafton around Washington Mills. Or we think of them, I think of them all as mill villages. So yeah. That's
That
whatever.
is the historic name though for where Washington Mills is,
Yeah,
that
the-
section. East of the river.
yeah, if you look it up on Mass Historic, you'll find that area labeled or named as North Grafton New England Village.
Mhm.
And again,
I've heard New England Village referred to that, and they got, you know, some money for that area, but I guess whenever I hear the term Mill Village, my mind goes right to South, but maybe it's because I'm from South, and I don't
yeah,
know.
it goes to where you're most familiar with. But yeah, if you want to get a reasonably accurate historically accurate name for the North Grafton Mill area, it would be New England Village.
So
I
it
think
sounds my marching orders will be to replace any town common area or town center with Grafton Center.
Yep.
Keep it that way.
yeah, I mean, there will be times when we want to refer more specifically to the common and the area immediately surrounding the common.
Correct.
And we still want to use the term common for that, but if we're referring to the common and a lot more of the area around it, then Grafton Center would be, I'm not going to try to, although I've drawn on my maps a boundary around what I'm calling Grafton Center. It's just sort of it's very, very approximate and should be understood as that. And the purpose for the village centers on my maps were to look at areas that we might want to focus on for development or redevelopment within, because we talk a lot about how we want to encourage and get more development within our village centers. And so the purpose of that map was to here are the areas of Grafton I think we could think of as village centers. I don't want to beat that horse to death either. So I guess, I mean, for now, let's just go with what we've talked about, as imprecise as it may be, and give it some more thought if we need to. But I don't want to dwell too heavily on that. My next issue here comes up in the land use chapter. And it's on the page in the latest draft, it's on the pages numbered 47 through 50. And that's not in the not in my comments on the spreadsheet there, because I only saw this within the last couple of days. It's something I should have spotted a long time ago. But let me see here. Where was I? In the land use chapter, and I'm going to try to point to where in that. What I mean, it's where we're talking about development since the 2001 comprehensive plan, and there are several charts and graphs depicting the housing growth from 1990 to 2000, 2010, 2010 to 22, and my problem is that this data, which is taken from the census, and most particularly the 2022 data, which comes from the ACS, is contradicted by the assessor data that I've been using to count housing units. It tells a rather different story. The assessor data tells a rather different story than the census data does, particularly in terms of housing growth from 2010 to now, and the breakdown between detached and attached / multifamily housing. Is the story I get from the assessor data is very different from what I get here. And ultimately, I mean, the conclusions that are stated here on the page that's numbered 46. Let's see. Housing growth, for example, it states that housing growth increased to 20% in the years from 2010 to 2022, and that's the actual numbers are more like 9% or 8%, depending on how many years you count. So overall, and I it's probably best not to try to go through all the gory details here in this conversation, but I have, and I just say, and say the assessor's data I have, like I said, at the risk of repeating myself, it tells a different story. One of the odd things I see on the chart on the bottom of page 49 in the document, which is page 45 in the PDF, it shows a negative growth, 41% negative growth in housing units, housing with 10 plus units. And that, we didn't destroy that many, we didn't destroy all that housing. So that is just obvious nonsense. So I don't know how we want to proceed with this, but and maybe Sarah, I can share with you guys, share more offline and not as part of this conversation, the details of how the data that I have that tells a significantly different story than the data that's currently in the draft master plan.
Sure.
I don't think it leads us to any changes in our master plan recommendations or action items. But nevertheless, it tells a story that I think is quite misleading particularly about the growth of multifamily housing. It gives an impression that's at odds with reality. Anne Marie, your hand is up.
Yeah, I would just request the rest of the committee could see that information too.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm just trying to look and see if I have something that.
Oh, not right now, just at if you're gonna send it to Sarah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd probably be best. I can put something, I've got a lot of charts and graphs and tables, but I think I would want to put that together in a
Yeah, I wasn't
more readable
at
form,
all.
but yeah, I'd be happy to, I'll share that. Yeah, without dwelling on it too much now, I'll share that with the committee and particularly with Sarah and company, and we can, we can say, like I say, it goes back to the different data sources we use, and the ACS in particular it's unlike the decennial census. The ACS is an estimate that has a fairly large margin of error, and if that's the only data you have access to, you'll use it. And it's sort of easy. It's sort of easy to look it up and use it, but the assessor data I use is it's much more specific in terms of unit counts, and I've got unit counts down to the building level.
Dave, is this in the matrix? This
I
comment?
don't think I put that in the matrix. I did not spot that issue until a couple of days ago as I was reading
Okay,
through the
very
draft
good.
plan for the third time.
I missed it too, so.
It's
fault.
something I should have seen a lot earlier, and I'm kicking myself for not having spotted it earlier.
Mhm.
Anyway, it's partly in the interest of, let's tell a story here that's somewhere close to reality. And these numbers are always moving targets too. Every year, I mean, I've in reviewing my data, I've seen actually it appears that a few housing units have disappeared since the first time I calculated that data to 3 or 4 years ago to now. And it's things change. The assessors data get updated, houses burn, houses get torn down and rebuilt. So things change a little bit, but anyway, I just wanted to make sure. Let's see. Oh, and related to that, it mentions in the plan in this section, the census data does not provide information on which zoning districts the new housing growth has taken place. I don't know whether that would be interesting, what anybody thinks. Would you like to see? I mean, it's for the most part not surprising that the residential, single family homes, for the most part, are built in single family home zoning districts. The only thing I do have a breakdown by zoning district, if we ever wanted to include that, but I'm not sure we do, but I bring it up because I want to know if anybody in the committee thinks that's really valuable. The only sort of interesting part about that is multifamily housing, condos and apartments. A lot of them are built outside of the multifamily home zoning district. Reason for that is basically they're 40Bs. 40Bs can be built anywhere. But does anybody think it's worthwhile to break down the housing development by zoning district? I'm inclined to say not. It's not that interesting, but
If it
since
tells a story.
Yeah.
If you're gonna see a pattern of obvious development, as you said, Dave, single family homes built in single family districts, multifamily, it's probably not a compelling story. But
well,
you know,
I'll tell
if-
you what, and since things are still a little bit in flux, we still have time to include it if we want to. I will share with the committee the data that I have, the breakdown of housing development by zoning district. I'll put that in a form that you can actually read and interpret in a useful way. Right now I've got the raw data, but I'm not quite I haven't tried to format it in a way that would be really telling a story. But yeah, I will share that with the committee, and if we decide that it's meaningful, we can add that into the master plan. I only bring it up because in the text of the master plan, they mentioned that we don't have a breakdown by zoning district. Well, we can get one.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I'll say on that. That we'll share the data and then we can decide. Further on in that same chapter, we've got, we just went over the census data, which is describing housing growth in terms of basically decades, 1990 through 2000, 2000 through 2010, 2010 through 20. And then we've got these maps of housing development that I provided, and they cover different periods. They cover 71 to 84, 85 to 06, and 07 to 21. Does anybody think that we should try to line up those numbers with the numbers by census decade? I think probably not, but just noticing that they were different periods of time used, is that good, or is that good, bad, or indifferent?
Consistency is good.
Again, I did not mention that anywhere in these, the chapter comments that you see on the screen.
Brian has a hand up.
That's another thing that just occurred to me as I was reading the draft for the third time this weekend. Brian.
Yeah, I just have a question, Dave. How were the breakdowns determined? That's really all I
Yeah.
had. Yeah.
Yeah, let me, if I can, quickest way for me to answer that is if I could share my screen. And so where is the screen that I want to share? I've got too many open windows on my screen here.
Sarah, just while Dave is pulling that up. So I think, are you comfortable with the marching orders as of right now? And once we kind of wrap up these kind of final comments from Dave, we can just briefly run back the schedule and then break for the evening.
Yeah.
You're feeling, okay, great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so the three maps that were included here, I've got 71 through 84, 85 through 06, and 2007 to 2021. Now, the reason I chose these particular years, they represent kind of eras of housing development. Yeah, and I also developed maps going further back, but 71 through 84 is basically when the baby boomers grew up and started buying houses. 85 through 06 is where we had a lot of housing development. Basically, this is the time period where Grafton underwent intensive suburbanization. Sort of a term I think that probably describes this pretty well. You can see that in the map how the housing development spread out into the outlying areas of Grafton. So this was an era of intensive suburbanization in Grafton. And then 2007 to 2021, that's basically encompasses the era of housing development that was choked off by the 2008 financial crisis. And I've updated these maps since they submitted them, and we might want to put the updated maps in, but I've updated it to cover through 2024. But that's basically these three time periods when you look at the overall pattern of housing development, in terms of the number of units developed each year, it kind of breaks down. There's the previous period would have been the post World War II, from 1949 or up through 1970 or so. There was some housing development. The housing development was more narrowly focused in Grafton then, but it's really the thing that really stands out here is this area where, in the early 80s, a lot of housing started getting developed up through 2006 or so, and then things slowed down after 2000. They slowed down a lot. But that's where it comes from, to answer a long-winded answer to your question, Brian. Bob, your hand is up.
Yeah, just real quick, I'm gonna have to go, but I had a lot of trouble understanding. I think it's that fourth map there, the color scheme was both different than any of the others, and it didn't work for me. You might want to
Yeah.
think about consistency and making it so even I can understand it.
Yeah,
Okay.
the housing, right, this housing density map here it speaks to a very different subject than the housing development maps do.
Yeah, that's fine, but I had trouble interpreting it, finding where I was and what it was telling me. It's just me. Never mind.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard subject to depict on a map even.
Mm. It, more than anything, it's just the colors and
Yeah, and
okay.
I can't make the colors, there's no consistency possible between the colors on that map and the colors on the other map because they have completely different meanings.
Yeah, but you have a lot of white area on that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it just don't worry about it.
Yeah,
I get that.
I can revisit that and see if there's, if nothing else, maybe I should fill in the white areas, or at least explain what the white areas are where there's no housing. But, you wouldn't necessarily know that except by inference. Well, anyway, a point taken. Fiona, your hand is up.
Yeah, so just a final two comments from me. So yeah, the housing density map, Dave, I think there is a little bit of data omission there. If I'm, the North Grafton area, I think is a little bit more dense than pictured based on recent projects. It's like five millennium might not be captured there.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think just maybe talk about that, and then just to go back to the original, I think if we're presenting data and we've been using it in, using ACS on a decade-long time frame, if we can align it, I mean, if the data is only available from a certain, from 07 to 2021, as in the map here on the left, I mean, then that's the time frame that the data is available, and we just provide a footnote explaining that to the reader. But I do think that a reader is going to open the document and say, well, we've been using decade comparisons throughout this, and now we're dividing it, and why are we dividing it in this way? And I think for flow, the information flow, because I think there was another issue that we had. I think it was maybe the open space chapter where there was some divisions between kind of obscure years, and a lot of like working group members, I think, were curious as to like, oh, how is this, why was this divided in this way? And I think that was just like the data that you had been able to pull from, town meeting and CPC and such. But if we can have a consistent data, snapshot time frame, I think that would be great. And if we can't, then just maybe we can put a footnote somewhere and say why.
I can very easily produce versions of these maps that you see on the screen here. I can produce versions of those maps that match up with the 10-year, the 10-year census-based time periods. I've got the data. All I have to do is plug different parameters into my GIS, and I get the new. So and that sort of gets back to why I'm even asking the question, was that the use of these different time periods. I explained why I chose these particular time periods. It tells a particular story about different eras of development in Grafton. Do we need to tell that story in the master plan? Not necessarily.
Okay.
Or if we do want to tell that story, maybe we need some narrative to explain something about the history of development in Grafton in different terms. But that could easily be a whole nother subject. We're not currently in the master plan talking about development in terms of those eras for which I drew these maps. And we don't have to. If we'd like to, fine. But yeah, for consistency with reading the housing data that appears of just a few pages before this, I can see potentially why these maps, and just as a minor point, the text here mentions 2 maps, and yet we've got 3 here. So again, if we want to align these maps with the same census-based time periods, we can do that and revise the text accordingly. Because like I said, I don't see anything in the text that really depends upon these maps depicting a particular time period. They may tell a sufficiently similar story if they're aligned with those other time periods. So I'll work on that. I'll do those maps and send them off.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And just Sarah, push back if it's good. This is going to be reinventing the wheel in the text as well, because if you've crafted a narrative around the data as presented and it's telling, again, a compelling story, I'm fine. This is just my initial thoughts, and I don't want to. I'm definitely not speaking for the working group, but I also just want to be realistic.
I'll tell you what, it would be worthwhile, and I will produce maps with the different time periods, and we'll look at the maps. I'll share them with everybody. We can look at the maps and see, the story we were trying to tell with these maps was kind of, we had a lot of development during this time period and then not so much here. If the newer maps, different maps tell the story in a sufficiently similar way, that's fine. Because that's the point I think we were trying to get across here, was that we had periods of rapid development and periods of slow development. And how many different ways can we tell that story? But okay, let's see. Was that everything I wanted to discuss here?
I think, Dave, just in the interest of time, we might need to might need to.
Yeah, I'm looking.
We might need to add more comments to the matrix and then revisit any of the outstanding issues in May.
I'm looking for anything else that I wanted to specifically bring up to the working group tonight. And oh, there was one question I had. It's kind of a small point, but it's something that maybe I have my opinion on that, but I think I'd like to know what everybody else thinks. There's a place in let me find that. Master plan talks this is in the town services and facilities chapter. The master plan talks about the adaptive reuse and frequent remodeling of the former Grafton High School. And I'm wondering what the best identification of the building is, because it started its life as the Grafton Junior Senior High School when it was built around 1953. By the time I got to town, it had just been converted for use as a municipal center. And when I think of the former Grafton High School, I think of what's now the middle school, because that was the high school when I started out in this town. So I'm wondering, and there's another reference to 25 Worcester Street as a former Grafton High School. That goes back even a lot farther in time. But what do most of us think is the best way to describe what is now the municipal center when it was a school, a former high school or a former junior senior high school? Yeah, I would kind of like to differentiate it from the former high school that's now the middle school. But what's the best name to use for that? Any thoughts, Brian, and then Chantel?
I thought you were talking about the junior high school or middle school, which I thought has something to do with John F. Kennedy. I'm not sure where I
Yes.
saw the plaque, I don't know if that would help.
I
But
think
that's
the
just something
John
else.
F. Kennedy, I don't know that it applied to those, but I believe that plaque is on the gym.
Is it on the gym? Okay. I wasn't sure if it was a school or what it was. All right. That's it. That's all I had.
Chantel?
Um, I apologize. It might just be me being fuzzy, but can you help us out with what the context of that is and why we would specifically need to call it anything other than the municipal center?
Well, the plan is talking about the adaptive reuse and frequent remodeling of the building that is now the municipal center. I think the point I think is making is that, we took an old school and we found a good way to reuse it. Now, if actually no one thinks it's important to mention its specific prior use, that solves the problem. We don't have to think of a name for it.
I feel like that's where I was leaning, but I don't know what the rest of the group feels.
Sue?
I think we should just leave it as municipal center and not mention former, because not only was it a former, it was an elementary school as well at some point. So I would just leave it municipal center.
Anybody disagree with that? Yeah, rather than trying to explain what it used to be. If we need to say something about what it was before it was a municipal center, call it a former, used to be a school, without trying to name the school. That works for me. All right, that answers that question. Was there anything else I needed the group's opinion on?
I
Okay.
do have to hop off soon if it's gonna be much longer.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't think, I have nothing else that I want to bring up. I've brought up too much stuff already. Again, some stuff I wish I should have brought up a long time before this, but better now than after we publish it. Yeah, the only other thing I'll mention is I've got a whole lot of notes about little things that I don't think I don't think I need to raise during this discussion. I will forward to Sarah, at least, Sarah and company, all my notes of, spelling issues I've found, some of which I'd mentioned in the comments in the spreadsheet online, but a lot more of which I spotted just reviewing the plan over the weekend. But we don't need to spend any time on that here tonight. I will send that off. And anything else I might come up with, I won't hesitate to comment on. Sue?
Yes, I just wanted to know what we will be discussing at our next meeting, what will be on the agenda? What direction are we going then?
Yeah, really that sort of brings us to what's probably the wrapping this meeting is up. It was, where do we go from here?
So, okay, so I think we need to address some of the outstanding concerns from this meeting, regroup in May, assess the comfort level of the group at that stage of the game, and then hopefully, be able to move forward with the original timeline of the public comment period. I think we're all pretty much on the same page regarding the timeline for planning board approval and town meeting, that we're not going to make it this time around because town meeting is fastly approaching. But if we could try and get most comments, the internal comments that we've discussed, finalized by the next meeting, and hash out any kind of final concerns, then that would be the goal. If we do need to have a June meeting, then so be it. But I think we have a good direction here. And I think, that's the game plan for the time being.
Mhm.
Sarah, please elaborate on what
My goal would have the May meeting confirm the draft plan ready for public comment. So in order for that to happen, we'll need any outstanding comments from this committee by April 16th. So we can try to push it back onto the committee to give you time to read it. We'd try to give a week for this giant plan. I'm hoping to give you more than a week to read it before the meeting. So for that, we'll need every comment in by April 16th. And we'll close down that matrix at that time for, the next round, so things don't get confusing, because we'll have a few drafts going.
Sarah, could you give us a timeline of when we're looking for the public meeting? When we're going to have public comment?
If next month, which I'm getting ahead of it, but I'm assuming it might be May 5th, is the next working group meeting. From there, we could have the public comment period. They're usually about a month.
Okay,
So then we would close it before the June meeting. So if there are comments from the public, we could discuss them in our June meeting.
all
Would be
right.
my.
Thank you.
Mhm.
If I may, Sarah, I'm sorry, I know it's late. So planning board is meeting on May 5th. That means Dave and I are out. So do we want to look at another day that week
Sure.
or after town meeting? Now that there's not as much of a rush, I think Wednesdays were okay with folks in the working group. So that would be May 7th. Does that not work for anyone?
That's good for me.
It doesn't work for me, but that's okay. There's actually
This-
no other day that week that works for me.
Okay. Is the 14th too late for people?
Is it Monday?
I was
Would that be-
looking at I was looking at that 7th, the following Wednesday, after the 5th, and then I also, with the 12th is town meeting, so that's out. Then there's the 14th, that Wednesday. I thought Wednesdays worked better for the group if I was recalling from the, from
Yeah,
before.
pretty sure. Right, as I remember, when we were starting out, we queried everybody for good days for meeting, and I think Mondays and Wednesdays Mondays were the first choice and Wednesdays were a second choice for at least quite a few of us.
Does anybody have an objection to May 14th, that Wednesday following town meeting?
No,
I
That'll work for
cannot
me.
attend, but if everyone else can, go for it.
I also won't be there, sorry, but you've got other folks that maybe can weigh in that aren't here that can probably be there.
Same here.
Then is Anne Marie the only person that can't attend on the 7th?
That is a Wednesday, correct?
Yes.
ma'am.
That should be fine.
yeah, I could do the 7th.
Then if Anne
7th
Marie,
works.
maybe the 7th is better.
Okay, so I'll move forward with the 7th if that works for everybody, just so we can, it's probably better to keep it in the same week, so, okay. Alrighty, Sarah, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover or discuss before we break?
No, it looks good. I think we'll just stick with that April 16th if you'd like any changes made before the public comment period. That would be crucial.
And I'll
Implementation.
send out, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, I'll send a reminder email out to the group as well before the 16th.
That would be good. And everybody's gonna read every word 3 times through, right?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Can I make a
It's-
motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
I think I heard a motion and a second to adjourn. And of course, the motion to adjourn is not debatable, so we'll do the roll call. Victoria,
Hi.
Anne Marie,
Holy aye.
Brian,
I,
Montel,
Aye.
Essex,
Aye.
Dave votes aye. Sue,
Aye.
and Colleen.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimous, so we are adjourned. Thank you for your patience.